More than 30 people have died in mass shooting incidents in the United States in the first 22 days of 2023. The incident in Monterey Park on the Chinese New Year on Saturday, which has left 10 people dead, comes as another vicious blow among many. In the wake of the deadly shooting, U.S. President Joe Biden has ordered U.S. flags to be lowered to honor the victims. The flag at the White House was lowered shortly thereafter. Hours after launching a manhunt, police said the suspect was found dead. The police also said the suspect, identified as a 72-year-old man who Can Tran, possibly shot himself when he saw cops approaching. Meanwhile, police in the nearby city of Alhambra are also investigating an incident that occurred at a dance studio exactly 17 minutes after the Monterey Park shooting, as an Asian man entered the Alhambra dance studio with a gun. Several people there wrestled him and the weapon away from him before he fled the scene. The Los Angeles County Sheriff later confirmed that investigators believe both scenes overnight are connected to the same suspect. There have been 33 mass shootings in the United States in just 22 days this year. Guns have become the leading cause of death among age 24 and under. There are 393 million privately owned firearms in the U.S. That's 120 guns for every 100 American. The U.S. gun death toll in 2022 was the highest in a decade, with 1,829 children below the age of 17 killed by gunfire. Guns were prominently used in the American Revolution. The right to bear arms is enshrined in the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. The National Rifle Association, known as the NRA, is one of the strongest gun lobbies in the United States. The annual budget for the lobby is around $250 million. Many prominent U.S. figures have been members of the NRA, like former vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin, the late actor Charleston Heston, and former U.S. President George H.W. Bush. The Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which guarantees gun ownership and the right to bear arms as a basic fundamental right, has long been a socio-political issue in America, notably among liberals and Democrats. The U.S. has had more mass shootings than any other country in the world. Anti-gun groups believe NRA's rigid call over the Second Amendment and the right for every American to protect themselves is the same idea played out in Hollywood movies, where the idea of having a gun and heroic violence is romanticized to its peak, for example, in the case of spaghetti Western movies or cowboy movies. Democrat lawmakers have often called for changes in gun laws, but little has happened despite a series of such killings. So will things ever change? That's the question that many are asking. For more on this, we are joined from Berlin by James Jackson. He's a journalist and a political analyst. James, thank you so much for joining us on WION.
Thanks for having me on.
So it seems it's so devastating to hear news like this, but then you think about California with one of the strictest gun control laws in the United States, and you wonder whether or not, when it comes to guns, more rigid policy on controlling Americans on firearms is the answer, or should we move past that and perhaps move on issues like mental health issues and other stringent policies, and perhaps both sides can finally come together in a Washington that's so polarized, notably on the issue of guns?
I think that's what everyone hopes can happen, but I think it's actually that polarization is one of the leading factors in why these mass shootings happen so much, because it doesn't happen in any other country. The other countries have loose gun laws. Other countries also have problems with mental health. But what we see in America is a very deadly combination of polarization, widespread economic insecurity, and then very loose gun laws, and also a polarization on the gun laws. So many people from the right, from the Republican Party, say that their right to bear arms as protected by the Second Amendment is a crucial thing to their sense of being an American. So it's going to be very difficult to make any kind of headway there. Especially as we've seen recently, more and more people are dressing as militia groups and going to, for example, drag story time. So showing that gun laws are loose and showing that you are someone who carries openly then contributes, of course, to a normalization. This is what a lot of experts say, a normalization of guns. The more guns you have around, the more shootings you're going to have. So I think gun laws definitely are the key factor here, but it's also not the only factor. And it's going to be really hard to make any headway in Congress. The Democrats didn't managed to when they had the presidency and both houses of Congress, whereas now the Republicans control the House of Representatives. It's going to be even harder. So I have to say I'm not very hopeful for anything changing.
Right. And the closest we got really was, I mean, this is the deadliest shooting after Uvalde, Texas, with that elementary school, which was so devastating back in the summer. And after that, we saw some leeway and headway to more background checks, and some measures with Republicans and Democrats coming together. That was back in July. And then again, I go back to these gun laws, which go state by state for the most part. And then the last two mass shootings have been in California with the toughest gun laws. And then the conversation then turns into, if you're a criminal or if you have mental health issues, do you really care about gun laws? Are criminals really going to abide by that? I mean, there are so many questions left unanswered, and I don't expect to answer them all during this segment, but since I have you, I would just love to pick your brain on, that aspect of it, the criminal aspect of it as well.
Of course. And having criminals with assault rifles is always going to be very dangerous and deadly. In fact, we shouldn't jump to conclusions about Monterey Park. The police, as far as I'm aware, are not ruling anything out. So this could be a criminal, or it could be terrorist, it could be anything. But I think the question is, if criminals don't care about gun laws, how can we set up a legal system where criminals can't get their hands on guns? So, I'm based in Europe, and Europe is, 500 million people. And it's very, very rare that we have mass shootings. I can remember in my lifetime, one or two in the UK, where I'm from. And a large part of this is because guns aren't normalized, and it's very hard. Of course, organized criminals can always get their hands on guns. But what we've seen in the vast majority of these shootings, despite the fact some have taken place recently in California, the vast majority of shooters get their hands on legal guns. And so as long as there's such a big domestic arms industry where in some states, I appreciate not California, you can buy a gun in a Target or a Walmart, it's going to be really hard to keep them out of the hands of criminals. And you're right that California has stricter laws, but it's going to be very difficult to change it on a state-by-state basis, because also people can travel. You can drive to another state without being stopped. Law enforcement has been pretty lax, it's fair to say, on enforcing these gun laws, on enforcing checks and on buyers. So I think what we really need is a federal law that makes a massive change, that makes the US more like other countries around the world, where it's not possible to own assault rifles. And I think we haven't seen that, despite some best efforts of some Democrats. Nancy Pelosi loved to say that, and Hillary Clinton as well, both love to say how much the NRA hated them. It's become a culture war issue. But sadly, they weren't able to make any big changes to get the US. So state by state, when we view it from Europe or the rest of the world, from India as well, the differences between American gun laws are actually pretty minor. And so what really matters here is the federal law. But then, of course, that is protected by the Second Amendment in the Constitution. So it's going to be a really tough challenge to solve.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen it in the past with the case of Al Gore. I can just think of one politician. You want to talk about a federal ban on guns, you can kiss any re-election campaign goodbye in the United States. That's one aspect of it as well. James Jackson, thank you so much for joining us from Berlin. We hope to have you back on WION very soon.
Thanks for having me.